October 17th, 1944, and Private First Class Thomas Harlow was crouched in the basement of a shattered farmhouse 3 miles east of Aachen, Germany, listening to the sound of tracked vehicles grinding closer to the pre-dawn darkness. His hands weren't shaking. They never did when he was behind a rifle. But his heart was hammering against his ribs because the math was simple and brutal. 12 men had held this farmhouse yesterday. Now there were 3, including him, and the German counterattack that had been building since midnight was about to hit their position with enough force to crush what remained of his squad into the rubble. The radio was dead. The lieutenant was among the bodies upstairs, and the 2 men with Harlow were riflemen who'd burned through most of their ammunition during the night fighting. Harlow had his weapon, a Springfield 1903, that didn't belong in this war anymore, that everyone said was obsolete, that he'd secretly modified using techniques learned in a completely different life. He had 43 rounds of ammunition, a spotting scope he wasn't supposed to have, and about 20 minutes before the Germans closed the distance enough to overrun the farmhouse. What happened in the next 24 hours would prove that sometimes the most lethal weapon on a battlefield isn't the one with the most firepower, but the one wielded by someone who understands precision so completely that every shot becomes a statement of absolute certainty. If you believe stories like this shouldn't vanish with time, subscribe. Let's keep their memory alive together. Thomas Harlow grew up in western Pennsylvania, in a town where competitive rifle shooting wasn't just a sport, but a cultural tradition that stretched back generations. His grandfather had competed in the national matches at Camp Perry. His father had been a regional champion in high-power rifle competitions. And by the time Harlow was 15, he was spending every weekend at the range, learning the discipline that separated casual shooters from true marksmen. Competitive shooting at that level wasn't about spray and pray, wasn't about firepower or tactical movement. It was about understanding ballistics so thoroughly that you could predict exactly where a bullet would go at 600 yards, accounting for wind, temperature, altitude, the Earth's rotation, if you were shooting far enough. It was about trigger control so refined that the rifle fired without you consciously deciding to fire it. Just a steady squeeze until the break surprised you. It was about breathing, heart rate, reading mirage through a spotting scope, adjusting for wind that changed between the time you fired and the time the bullet arrived at the target. Harlow was good at it. Good enough to place 3rd in the National High Power Rifle Championship in 1941, shooting against men twice his age with decades more experience. He understood the Springfield 1903 rifle better than most gunsmiths, knew every quirk of the platform, knew how to tune it for maximum accuracy, knew the difference between a rifle that shot acceptable groups and one that put every round to the same hole at 200 yards. When war came in December 1941, Harlow was 19 and working in a Pittsburgh machine shop, saving money for college and spending every spare moment either at the range or studying ballistics theory. He enlisted in February 1942, figuring his shooting skills would translate directly to military usefulness, maybe get him into a sniper program or at least a position where marksmanship mattered. What he discovered was that the Army had very specific ideas about how infantrymen should shoot, and those ideas had almost nothing to do with the precision shooting Harlow had spent years mastering. The M1 Garand, the standard-issue rifle he was given in basic training, was a superb combat weapon, semi-automatic, reliable, firing a powerful cartridge, perfect for the kind of rapid fire at close to medium ranges that infantry combat demanded. But it wasn't a precision instrument in the way Harlow understood precision. The sights were optimized for speed, not accuracy. The trigger was heavy, designed to prevent accidental discharge rather than facilitate clean breaks. The rifle's accuracy potential was good, maybe 3 or 4 inches at 100 yards with factory ammunition, which was fine for combat, but nowhere near what Harlow could achieve with a properly tuned bolt-action rifle. The Army's marksmanship training focused on rapid fire, on putting enough rounds downrange fast enough to suppress the enemy, on shooting man-sized targets at ranges under 300 yards. It was practical, it was effective for most soldiers, but it made Harlow's competitive shooting background feel irrelevant, a specialized skill the military didn't need or want. He went through training, qualified expert with the M1, and shipped to England in late 1943 as part of replacement pipeline feeding divisions preparing for the invasion of Europe. He was assigned to the 1st Infantry Division, the Big Red one, and spent the spring of 1944 training for the amphibious assault everyone knew was coming. Harlow was a good soldier, followed orders, kept his head down, but he felt like his real skills were being wasted. Then, 3 weeks before D-Day, something changed. His platoon sergeant, a man named Vickers who'd fought in North Africa and Sicily, was talking to platoon about weapon specialization and mentioned that anyone with competitive shooting experience should speak up because there might be opportunities for designated marksman roles. Harlow volunteered immediately, explained his background, and Vickers arranged for a demonstration. They went to a range. Harlow was given a Springfield 1903 with a scope. The Army still had them in inventory, though they were being phased out and told to engage targets at ranges from 300 to 600 yards. Harlow proceeded to hit 23 out of 25 shots, most of them dead center, at ranges where the other men in the platoon couldn't even see the targets clearly. Vickers watched through binoculars, didn't say anything for a long moment, then told Harlow he could carry the Springfield instead of the M1 if he wanted, on the condition that he understood he'd be expected to make shots other riflemen couldn't make, to engage targets at extended ranges, to function as a precision asset rather than a standard rifleman. Harlow took the Springfield. It was a 1903A3 model, manufactured during the war, with basic iron sights and no scope, because scope rifles were reserved for officially trained snipers, which Harlow wasn't. But he didn't need a scope, not for the ranges he'd be shooting at. What he needed was a rifle that was properly tuned, and the one he'd been issued was not. The trigger was gritty, breaking at around 6 pounds with noticeable creep. The barrel was standard military grade, which meant adequate but not match quality. The stock fit was loose, allowing the barrel to shift slightly under different conditions. For standard infantry work, these issues didn't matter. For what Harlow intended to do, they mattered immensely. So he began modifying a rifle, quietly, using tools borrowed from the armor and techniques learned in years of building competition guns. He disassembled the trigger assembly and carefully stoned the sear and hammer engagement surfaces, polishing them until the trigger broke clean at just under 4 pounds. Light enough for precision, but heavy enough to be safe in combat. He bedded the barrel using a mixture of epoxy and sawdust, creating a stable, consistent contact between the barrel and stock that ensured the barrel vibrated the same way with every shot. He checked the crown of the muzzle, found it slightly damaged, and carefully re-crowned it using a brass screw and lapping compound, ensuring the gas escaping behind the bullet would release evenly and not disturb the bullet's flight. He adjusted the iron sights, shimming the rear sight base to eliminate any play, and blackened all the metal to reduce glare. What he ended up with was a rifle that, on paper, was still a standard-issue Springfield 1903A3, but in reality was capable of consistent accuracy to 500 yards or more, hitting within a 2-inch circle if Harlow did his part. He landed on Omaha Beach on June 6, 1944, carrying that rifle, and spent the next 4 months fighting across France. His role in the platoon was exactly what Vickers had described. He was a precision element, the soldier who engaged targets other riflemen couldn't reach, who took out enemy machine gunners at 400 yards, who covered advances by suppressing enemy positions with carefully aimed fire, who functioned as a force multiplier because every shot he took had a purpose and almost always achieved that purpose. He wasn't a sniper in the classic sense. He didn't work alone, didn't go on long-range reconnaissance missions, but he was something close to it, a designated marksman before that term officially existed. The other men in the squad learned to trust his shooting, learned that when Harlow said he could hit a target, he would hit it, learned to coordinate their movements around the cover his rifle provided. He wasn't the most popular soldier in the platoon. He was quiet, focused, spent his downtime cleaning his rifle and hand-loading ammunition when he could get the components. But he was respected because results mattered more than personality, and Harlow delivered results with mechanical consistency. By October 1944, the 1st Infantry Division was pushing into Germany itself, fighting to the fortified border regions near Aachen, and the nature of the combat had shifted. The rapid advance across France was over, replaced by grinding, close-quarters urban fighting and defensive battles where every building and farmhouse became a fortress. The Germans were fighting on their home soil now, defending every inch with desperation and tactical competence born of 5 years of war. Casualties were heavy on both sides. Harlow's platoon had been cycled through several engagements, taking losses, absorbing replacements who didn't have the experience or cohesion of the original unit. By mid-October, the platoon was down to about two-thirds strength, exhausted, low on supplies, and tasked with holding a series of forward positions while the main American force prepared for another push. One of those positions was a farmhouse complex 3 miles east of Aachen, a 2-story stone building with good fields of fire overlooking an approach route the Germans were using to move reinforcements and supplies. Intelligence said the position needed to be held to prevent German forces from flanking the American advance. But intelligence also said the Germans were planning a counterattack to retake the farmhouse and the ridgeline it sat on. Harlow's squad, 12 men under a young lieutenant fresh from officer training, moved into the farmhouse on the afternoon of October 16th. They fortified the building as best they could, set up interlocking fields of fire, established a radio link with battalion headquarters, and settled in to wait. The position was exposed, too far forward to be easily reinforced, but the strategic logic was sound. Hold the farmhouse, control the approach route, deny the Germans freedom of movement. The squad spent the afternoon digging in, and as evening fell, the tension built. Everyone knew the Germans would come. It was just a question of when and in what strength. The answer came around midnight. German forces, probably a reinforced company, hit the farmhouse with a coordinated assault supported by mortars and machine gun fire. The attack was brutal and professional, exactly the kind of night combat the Germans excelled at. The Americans fought back, but they were outnumbered and outgunned. The machine gun position on the second floor was knocked out by a mortar round. The lieutenant was killed leading a counterattack to repel infiltrators who'd reached the ground floor. Men died in the darkness, in the confusion, and by 0300 hours, the German assault had been repelled, but the cost was catastrophic. 9 Americans were dead or too badly wounded to fight. That left Harlow and 2 other men, Private Collins, a rifleman from Ohio, and Private Mendez, a bargainer from Texas who'd lost his weapon when a grenade exploded near his position and now carried only a carbine and 3 magazines. The 3 survivors consolidated in the basement, the most defensible position left in the shattered farmhouse. Harlow assessed their situation with the cold practicality of someone who'd learned to compartmentalize fear. The radio was destroyed, which meant no communication with headquarters, no artillery support, no hope of immediate reinforcement. They had small arms ammunition, but not much. Collins had maybe 60 rounds for his M1, Mendez had 90 rounds for his carbine, and Harlow had 43 round to .30-06 for his Springfield. They had a few grenades, a first aid kit, and no food or water beyond what they carried. Outside, the German forces were regrouping, and with dawn approaching, they'd be able to see the farmhouse clearly and coordinate another assault. The smart play, the survival play, was to abandon the position under cover of darkness and try to infiltrate back to American lines. But the farmhouse sat on a key piece of terrain, and if the Germans retook it unopposed, they have observation over a mile of approach routes, which would cost American lives in the next offensive. And Harlow had 43 rounds of match-grade ammunition he'd painstakingly hand-loaded over the past 2 months, rounds he'd built specifically for maximum accuracy, and a rifle capable of hitting targets at ranges the Germans wouldn't expect. He told Collins and Mendez his plan. They'd hold the farmhouse as long as possible, not through close combat, but through precision fire that would make any German approach prohibitively costly. Harlow would engage targets at extended range, picking off leaders and heavy weapons crews, creating chaos and hesitation in the German ranks. Collins and Mendez would cover the close approaches, dealing with any enemy that got within 300 yards. It was insane, tactically suicidal. 3 men trying to hold a position that 12 had barely defended. But the alternative was abandoning the farmhouse and accepting that the position would fall, and none of the 3 men were willing to make that choice. They were exhausted, they were scared, but they were also soldiers who'd survived this long by being better than the enemy expected. And they had one advantage the Germans didn't know about: Harlow's rifle and his ability to use it at ranges that defied the normal calculus of infantry combat. As dawn broke on October 17th, Harlow positioned himself at a second-floor window that gave him a clear view east toward the German lines. He'd reinforced the window with rubble to create a stable shooting position, arranged furniture to break up his silhouette, and set up his spotting scope, a civilian 20-power model he'd carried since England, to scan for targets. The light was just coming up, that flat gray dawn light that makes range estimation difficult. But Harlow had shot in every condition imaginable during his competitive years, and he knew how to compensate. He glassed the terrain methodically, looking for movement, for the telltale signs of soldiers preparing to advance. He found them at 0545, approximately 600 yards out, a group of German infantry gathering in a tree line, clearly staging for an assault. Harlow counted at least 30 men, probably more hidden deeper in the trees. He could see an officer or NCO directing soldiers, pointing toward the farmhouse, organizing the attack. This was the target that mattered most. Kill the leader, disrupt the coordination, buy time. The range was extreme for iron sights, at the very edge of what Harlow considered reliable, but the conditions were good. Wind was minimal, maybe 2 miles per hour from the left, not enough to significantly affect bullet trajectory. Temperature was cool, which meant his ballistics would be consistent with a 0. He had a stable position, good light for his sights, and a clear target. He settled behind a rifle, felt the familiar weight of the Springfield, controlled his breathing, and aimed. At 600 yards, the German officer was barely visible through the iron sights, just a small shape against the tree line. Harlow aimed center mass, held for elevation based on his memorized come-ups, felt his heartbeat slow, felt the trigger reach its break point, and squeezed. The rifle fired. The recoil drove back into his shoulder, and 600 yards away, the German officer collapsed. The soldiers around him scattered, diving for cover, and the organized staging for the assault disintegrated into confusion. Harlow worked the bolt, ejected the spent case, chambered a fresh round, and scanned for another target. He found one almost immediately, a soldier trying to drag the fallen officer to cover. Harlow fired again, another hit, and the soldier dropped. The Germans were panicking now, firing wildly toward the farmhouse, but with no clear idea where the shots were coming from. They were expecting close-range combat, expecting to suppress the farmhouse with machine gun fire and assault under that cover. They weren't expecting precision rifle fire from 600 yards, weren't equipped to deal with a marksman who could reach out and kill them before they even entered their own effective engagement range. Harlow fired a third time, hitting a soldier who'd stood up to look for the shooter. Then a fourth shot, another hit, in less than 90 seconds. He'd killed 4 Germans and broken up the assault before it even started. For the next hour, Harlow fought methodical, calculated battle. The Germans tried to advance, tried to close the distance to the farmhouse, but every time a group moved, Harlow engaged them. He fired on soldiers crossing open ground at 500 yards. He shot at machine gun teams trying to set up supporting fire at 400 yards. He engaged officers and NCOs at ranges where his targets couldn't even accurately return fire. Each shot was deliberate, each target carefully selected. He prioritized leadership, crew-served weapons, anyone coordinating the German efforts. He didn't waste ammunition on targets of opportunity. With only 43 rounds, every shot had to count. By 0700 hours, he'd fired 11 rounds and scored 10 hits. The German assault had stalled completely. Their infantry pinned down by a single rifle they couldn't locate precisely and couldn't suppress with return fire. Around 0730, the Germans shifted tactics. They brought up mortars, and for the next 20 minutes, the farmhouse was bracketed by explosions. Harlow and the others sheltered in the basement as the building shook and rubble rained down. When the barrage lifted, Harlow returned to his shooting position to find that half the second floor had collapsed. He moved to a ground floor window, less ideal but still workable, and glassed the terrain. The Germans were advancing again, this time with better coordination, using the mortar smoke as concealment. Harlow spotted them at 400 yards, infantry moving by squads and short rushes. He began engaging, 1 shot per target, steady and precise. A squad leader went down at 380 yards. A machine gunner carrying his MG-42 collapsed at 410 yards. A soldier with a radio pack, probably a forward observer for the mortars, dropped at 430 yards. The advance faltered again, the Germans realizing that the mortar barrage hadn't eliminated the threat. that someone in that farmhouse was still shooting with unnerving accuracy. By 0900 hours, Harlow had fired 22 rounds and scored 19 hits. His shoulder was bruised from recoil, his eyes strained from staring through iron sights in the spotting scope, but his hands were steady and his mind was clear. He wasn't thinking about fear or survival anymore. He was operating in the zone that competitive shooters talked about, that state of total focus where the rifle becomes an extension of your will, where you see the target and the bullet goes there without conscious thought intervening. Collins and Mendez were holding the close approaches, firing occasional shots at Germans who tried to infiltrate within 200 yards. But the real battle was being fought at ranges beyond their capability, where Harlow's precision made the difference between holding and being overrun. Around 1000 hours, the Germans tried something different. They sent a sniper team to engage Harlow, a shooter with a scoped rifle who set up in a position about 500 yards out, and began scanning for Harlow's location. Harlow spotted the glint of the scope lens through his spotting scope, identified the position, and faced a tactical problem. The German sniper had optics, which gave him an advantage in target acquisition. But Harlow had the better position, better concealment, and years of experience shooting against competitors who were just as skilled as he was. The German sniper fired first, the round cracking past Harlow's window and impacting the wall behind him. Close, but not close enough. Harlow didn't flinch. He calculated the German's position based on the sound and the impact, aimed carefully, and fired. The German sniper's scope shattered, and the shooter slumped forward. It was the longest and most difficult shot Harlow had made all day, threading a bullet through a narrow window of opportunity at a target that was actively hunting him, and he'd made it with iron sights against an opponent with a scope. The psychological effect on the German forces was devastating. They'd sent their best marksman, and he'd been killed by a shooter they couldn't even locate precisely. The assault stopped. The Germans shifted to a defensive posture, content to keep the farmhouse suppressed with occasional machine gun fire, but unwilling to risk more casualties trying to take it by force. Harlow used the lull to consolidate his position, to check his remaining ammunition, 21 rounds left, and to assess his physical condition. He was exhausted, dehydrated, running on adrenaline and muscle memory. His wounded arm from a week-old shrapnel injury was throbbing, and his vision was starting to blur at the edges from my strain. But the farmhouse was still in American hands, and the German forces were stalled, which meant the mission was succeeding. The afternoon brought new problems. Around 1300 hours, German armor appeared. A Panzer IV tank and 2 half-tracks carrying infantry. The tank was the real threat, capable of reducing the farmhouse to rubble with its main gun. Harlow had no anti-tank capability, no way to engage the armor directly, but he could engage the infantry supporting the tank, and he could target the tank commander who was directing operations from the turret hatch. The tank stopped at about 400 yards, probably preparing to fire. Harlow sighted on the commander, a German officer visible from the chest up, and fired. The officer dropped into the turret, hit or taking cover, and the tank's movements became more cautious. Harlow engaged the infantry dismounting from the half-tracks, hitting 3 soldiers in rapid succession. The German advance stalled again, the tank crew unwilling to proceed without infantry support, and the infantry unwilling to advance under Harlow's fire. It was a stalemate, but a stalemate favored the defenders. For the next several hours, Harlow fought a battle of attrition and nerves. The Germans probed the farmhouse defenses, looking for weaknesses, and Harlow responded with precisely aimed fire that punished every attempt. He shot a machine gun team setting up at 350 yards. He engaged a mortar crew preparing to fire at 420 yards. He hit a German trying to flank the farmhouse at nearly 500 yards, a running target that required leading the shot and perfect timing. Each engagement burned another precious round, and Harlow was acutely aware that his ammunition was running out. By 1600 hours, he was down to 8 rounds, and the Germans were showing signs preparing for another major assault, massing forces in the Treeline for what would probably be an overwhelming attack that 3 men couldn't stop. That's when American artillery began falling on the German positions. The sudden barrage caught the Germans completely by surprise, scattering their formations and killing or wounding dozens. Harlow watched through his spotting scope as the German forces broke and retreated, abandoning their vehicles, abandoning their wounded. just trying to escape the artillery. 10 minutes later, American infantry arrived, a full platoon moving fast to reinforce the farmhouse. Harlow and the 2 other survivors were pulled out, evacuated to a field aid station. And for the first time in 24 hours, Harlow allowed himself to relax. His hands started shaking then, the adrenaline crash hitting hard, and he realized just how close they had come to being overrun. The after-action report told the story in cold numbers. Harlow had fired 35 rounds over approximately 11 hours of combat. He'd scored 31 confirmed hits, with 26 confirmed kills based on body counts recovered when American forces advanced through the battlefield. He'd engaged targets at ranges from 300 to 600 yards, consistently hitting at distances where most riflemen would have been ineffective. He'd single-handedly disrupted multiple German assaults, killed enough leaders and specialists to break their coordination, and held a critical position long enough for reinforcements to arrive. The battalion commander, a colonel who'd fought in North Africa, reviewed the report and couldn't quite believe it. One rifleman, with a bolt-action rifle and iron sights, had held off a company-strength force for most of the day through nothing but precision marksmanship. It was the kind of performance that earned medals in other contexts, but Harlow's action fell into a bureaucratic gap. He wasn't officially a sniper, wasn't part of a special unit, was just a rifleman who happened to be exceptionally good at his job. Harlow didn't care about medals or recognition. What mattered to him was that the mission had succeeded, that Collins and Mendez had survived, that the farmhouse had been held. His rifle, the modified Springfield he'd built in secret, had performed exactly as he designed it to perform. Every modification he'd made, the trigger work, the bedding, the sight adjustments, had contributed to accuracy that made the difference between hitting and missing at critical moments. The rifle was still functional, still accurate, and Harlow kept using it for the rest of the war. He fought through the Battle of the Bulge, through the crossing of the Rhine, all the way to Germany's surrender in May 1945, and throughout that time, he remained the designated marksman for his platoon, the soldier who made the shots nobody else could make. The broader implications of Harlow's action took years to fully manifest. In the immediate aftermath, other units in the division began looking for soldiers with competitive shooting backgrounds, began experimenting with designated marksman concepts, began recognizing that precision fire had a place in infantry tactics even in the age of semi-automatic rifles and machine guns. The lessons learned in engagements like Harlow's farmhouse stand eventually fed into formal doctrine, into the development of designated marksman programs that became standard in later conflicts. But in 1944, Harlow was an outlier, a soldier whose civilian skills translated to military effectiveness in ways the Army hadn't anticipated or systematized. He was proof that sometimes the most effective weapon isn't the newest or most advanced, but the one wielded by someone who understands it completely and has the skill to exploit its full potential. Harlow returned home in late 1945, went back to Pennsylvania, and resumed his life. He worked in the machine shop, got married, had children, and eventually opened his own gunsmithing business, specializing in precision rifles. He competed in shooting matches again, won several regional championships, and became known in competitive shooting circles as someone who understood rifle accuracy at a level few others achieved. He didn't talk much about the war, didn't tell the story of the farmhouse, except to a few close friends who'd been there. The rifle, his modified Springfield, stayed with him. He kept it in perfect condition, occasionally taking it to the range to verify that the accuracy he'd built into it still held. It did, always, because the work had been done right the first time. When Harlow died in 2003 at the age of 81, his family donated the rifle to the National Infantry Museum, along with documentation of his service, and the after-action report from October 17, 1944. The rifle sits in a display case now, labeled as a testament to individual skill and innovation. Visitors see it as an old bolt-action rifle, nothing special, not understanding that what they're looking at is a weapon that was modified by someone who understood precision so completely that he could turn an obsolete platform into the most effective rifle on a battlefield. The farmhouse where Harlow made his stand is still there, restored after the war, now a private residence in a Germany that has long since moved past the conflict that devastated it. The fields around the farmhouse are peaceful, farmland again, with no indication that they were once a killing ground where one man's skill redefined what was possible. The legacy of Harlow's action isn't captured in medals or official recognition. He received neither, but in the quiet influence his example had on military thinking. The idea that precision matters, that a single skilled rifleman can have disproportionate impact, that civilian shooting skills translate to military effectiveness. These concepts, proven by men like Harlow under the worst possible conditions, eventually became doctrine. The designated marksman programs in Iraq and Afghanistan, the emphasis on marksmanship training in modern infantry units, the recognition that not every soldier needs to shoot the same way or carry the same weapon. All of these owe something to soldiers who proved, through blood and skill, that precision has a place in war. Harlow didn't revolutionize military tactics, didn't change the course of the war, but he demonstrated something more fundamental. That mastery matters, that a craftsman's understanding of his tools can make the difference between survival and death, that what seems impossible is often just untested. He was a competition shooter who became a soldier, a civilian marksman who proved that civilian skills have military value, an ordinary man who, for 24 hours in October 1944, became the most dangerous person on the battlefield because he refused to accept that his rifle couldn't do what needed to be done. Where are you watching this story from? Comment below. If this story moved your heart even once, subscribe. It's the least tribute we can give to men like him,